Welcome to I.N.SANE's Asylum. The doctor is in. Sane. And today, I am reviewing the movie Get Out. Apparently, this is a movie of a white girl and a black boyfriend going to meet her parents, and apparently, the black guy finds out secrets of the family. But anyway, I am going to start spoiling this movie, so if you haven't seen it yet, and you want to sometime, you don't want to hear spoilers, I recommend pausing the video. Anyway, the movie starts with a black guy walking down the street, and a car pretty much drives by slowly. It turns around and then stops him for a bit. He then tries to walk the other way, and then we see that the driver got out of the car, but we don't see where the driver went. He then gets abducted by the driver, he gets thrown in the trunk, and they take off with him. And then in the present, we meet up with the main cast, a black guy named Chris and a white woman named Rose, who are dating, have been dating them for on to 4 or 5 months. And Rose is wanting to take Chris up to meet his parents, meet her parents, as soon as I get my facts straight. Anyway, on the way, a deer flies across the street, breaking out their passenger headlight and passenger mirror, which, by the way, the deer was coming from the driver's side, which means, how could it be possible that they hit the mirror? Is beyond me. But anyway, they then talk to a cop. The cop says something about, I'll call animal control next time. And even though Rose was driving the car, the cop wanted to see Chris's license. And Rose bring up some race bullshit. Let me explain something. One issue I have in the real world is the way people bring up race anymore. It's a bunch of made up bullshit anymore. Yeah, there really is racism. But that's kind of my issue with this movie. But anyway, we then continue where Rose makes it to the parents' house. The parents, Dane and Missy, introduce themselves. And Dane admits he hates deer. He believes deer are taking over, so he applauds them for running over the deer. And then Dane shows Chris around the house, and they meet the maid named, a black woman named Georgina. Usually I don't bring up the race, but since this is kind of the main plot, I will admit who's white and who's black. Georgina, you could just see she'd stand there with a smile on her face, but also see she has a dark secret. And then Chris kind of sees the gardener, a black gardener named Walter. Later on, when they're in bed, Chris and Rose are sleeping, and then Chris wakes up. He goes outside to smoke, which, by the way, he's trying to be a recovery smoker. He's smoking, but he's trying to quit. Anyway, he goes out front, and he sees Walter, the gardener, run towards him, and then just turns off and runs off in the distance. And then he sees Georgina looking out the window, and in a way, you kind of see Georgina is actually looking at her reflection in the window. Chris then gives up on trying to smoke the cigarette. He goes in the house, and here's Missy sitting in the dark room. She turns on the light and then invites Chris into the office and brings up Chris bring up his past by sort of hypnotizing him by stirring her cup of tea. And Chris brings up that his mom got hit by a car when he was a kid, and he did nothing except sat there. And then it's sort of like Chris was actually all defenseless, and here he is going in a dark window, a dark space, where his eyesight is about a mile away. And then all this turned out to be a dream. Only to find out when he talks to Walter the gardener, Walter brings up he knows that he was in Missy's office, kind of revealing that it wasn't a dream after all. Another character I forgot to bring up to this point is Rose's brother, Jeremy, who apparently talks to Chris about sports. Chris confesses he likes basketball. Jeremy admits he likes UFC, MMA, and he's trying to challenge Chris to a wrestling match, MMA match. And then sort of like Rose kind of talks him out of it. The next day, a bunch of other rich white people are coming over, and apparently Chris comes across another black guy. This guy reveals himself to be named Logan, which, by the way, he's also the same guy that gets abducted at the beginning. And apparently Chris goes to greet him and was reaching out for a fist bump, and Logan just goes like this, like a handshake, even though Chris still has his hand in the fist bump. Anyway, Chris then takes a snapshot with his phone at Logan, and then Logan snaps at him and tells him to get out. And apparently, anyway, Dane and everybody waves it off as some kind of seizure. Which, by the way, Chris meets this blind artist, this art dealer named Jim Hudson, who's blind. But yeah, Chris kind of talks to him. And I'm mentioning this guy because he comes into the plot later on. Chris is surrounded by everybody at the party. Anyway, they're all chatting with each other. He goes upstairs, and everybody at the party just suddenly goes silent, and they all look up to the ceiling like they're listening to his moves. And apparently Chris goes up to his room and sees his phone unplugged. And he thinks Gina unplugged it. I don't remember if this was the first time or the second time, but 2 times he actually comes up to see his phone unplugged. I don't remember if this one was first or second. But the second time it happens, he assumes Gina was unplugging it. And Gina comes into the room and apologizes about unplugging the phone. And it's sort of like Chris brings out... Anyway, Gina kind of brings up how Rose's family has treated her like family, but you can see tears dripping out of her eyes. So here she is kind of smiling, but crying at the same time. So like the real Gina's trying to come out. But she can't manage to come out. Also on another note, Chris has this cop friend named Rod. Apparently, Chris sends Rod the picture of Logan. And Rod quickly calls back and mentions that Logan is actually a guy named Andre who got abducted 6 months ago, so revealing the beginning was 6 months earlier. Anyway, Chris then talks Rose into leaving, and as he looks in the attic closet, he comes across pictures of Rose with random black guys. Sort of like, oh, her past boyfriends were black, and never mind that earlier on she mentioned that he was her black one, so to speak. I can't say she literally said it, though. Anyway, still kind of trusting Rose, he kind of talks her into finding the keys so they can get to the car. But as soon as he gets to the front door, he's stopped by the rest of the family. Jeremy tries to pick a battle with Chris by using his mop. And apparently, Missy just taps her cup of tea. And then Chris passes out, goes back into that zone that he was in. And Rose showing her true colors all of a sudden, revealing that she was in on the plan all along as well. She tells him that he was her favorite. One of her favorites. While Jeremy and Dane carry Chris's unconscious body to the basement of the house. Which, by the way, earlier on, he says Dane mentions nobody goes in the basement. So this is the first time we actually see the basement. It's actually a man cave, pretty much. But anyway, they then turned him towards this TV, this stereo TV, one of these old-fashioned TV stereos. I don't know what you really call them. But it's sort of like Jim Hudson kind of appears on the TV and then talks about how he's going to take over Chris's body. There was some other scene earlier. I don't remember. This guy had a name. I don't remember what his name was. But anyway, it ends with Jim Hudson being on the screen talking about he's going to take over Chris's body because he wants to be able to see again, uses Chris's eyesight. So then we see Dane getting Jim's body ready, getting ready to remove his brain from his head. And apparently, while Chris is still watching the TV, we then see that Missy kind of stirs the tea. Sorry that I hesitate on the names. I'm trying to remember who everybody is. So she kind of puts him to sleep, but he falls asleep real quickly. Jeremy comes in and then tries to unties Chris. Which, by the way, we see Chris clawing the chair. And even though his hands are cuffed to the chair, he somehow manages to get cotton in his ears so he don't hear the tea hypnotizing him. So as Jeremy gets up, gets Chris ready, Chris grabs a bocce ball and then knocks Jeremy unconscious with it. And by the way, there was also a deer head in this man cave. Chris uses that deer head and kills Dane with the antlers. Pins him against the wall with the deer antlers. He then confronts Missy. And it's sort of like he realizes she's far away from her tea, so they both kind of race to get to the cup of tea. He knocks it off and shatters it. She goes for a knife and attempts to stab him, but then he counters and stabs her in the head, kills her. And then Jeremy recovers, hooking Chris in a headlock. And Chris trying to go out, open the door, and sort of like Jeremy pulls the door, pulling him back. And then on the third or fourth try, Chris grabs the key out of the door and stabs Jeremy in the leg with it. And then he stumps Chris's head in, killing him. I mean, stumping Jeremy's head in and then killing him. See, like I said, I'm not good on names. But anyway, Jeremy's dead now, so that just leaves Rose, the only one left. And apparently she's on a web search. Also, I failed to remember to mention about Rod, Chris's friend Rod. He goes to talk to some detectives. First of all, he talks to the woman detective and explains everything that he believes is going on with Chris. And that white people are actually hypnotizing them. And it's sort of like she brings in two more detectives. And then sort of like he explains all over again how the way they're hypnotizing blacks to be their sex slaves. And then the detectives are all serious at first. And then the two guys start laughing. And then the woman detective tells them, don't say I ever gave you anything. And then she starts laughing along. So now that Rod realizes he's on his own, he's trying to call up Chris. Searches Chris's house. He tries to call up Rose, trying to get, and realizes Rose is being shady. And then he hooks his phone up to a recorder. And apparently Rose was on to him. So we kind of just see Rod no more until the very end. And then Chris goes up to face Rose. I spoke too soon. Chris manages to take the car keys and take off in the dad's car, take off in Dane's car. And as he scared Georgina off earlier, he then takes off driving and he accidentally runs over Georgina. And then he kind of talks him, he's trying to decide if he's going to take her body with him or not. So he does unload her in the car. And then Rose comes out the door with a gun. And then revealing that Georgina was actually the grandma inside the woman's body. And then the grandma recovers, aka Georgina, and tries to attack Chris. Chris wrecks the car and kills her instantly. And then Rose goes up to approach Chris with the gun, trying to shoot at him. And then Walter runs by, revealing that Walter is their grandpa. So he attempts to choke out Walter. Here I go again, messing up on names. So then Walter, as he's trying to choke Chris grabs his phone and takes a snapshot, taking Walter out of his trance, realizing he's not really the grandpa. So he then asks for Rose. He wants to finish off Chris himself, so Rose hands him the gun, the rifle, and then shoots Rose with the rifle, and then shoots himself dead. And then Chris, realizing just he and Rose are the only two living, he gets on top of Rose and attempts to choke her. Apparently the choking doesn't work on her for some reason, but she kind of laughs, and then a cop car shows up. We were thinking this was the cop that, well, I was believing this was the cop that pulled them over at the beginning, but apparently that cop, instead of that cop, it turned out to be Rod. So then Rod and Chris escape unarmed, but Rose kind of showing a smile on her face, so I kind of think she managed to possess Chris somehow. But we don't know because the end credits rolled. Alright. One thing I'm going to mention is, one thing I haven't done on my previous movie reviews was actually rate them. So due to the fact of all the race talk at the beginning, which I wasn't too big on, which kind of made the movie suck at the beginning for me, but then later on, it then became awesome as hell. So I ranked this, which by the way, I call my stars Mr. Statics. I ranked this 3 Mr. Statics out of 5. That's all for this episode of I.N.SANE's Asylum. The Doctor is out.